There is a version of you that is still awake right now, not you, exactly. Not the you that decided to lie down, pulled the covers up, and closed your eyes with the intention of sleeping. That version made a reasonable decision based on the hour and the heaviness in the limbs, on the simple fact that the day has ended and there is nothing left to do with it. That version understands the logic of rest. It knows the body needs sleep the way it needs food and water, and it has arranged the circumstances accordingly. A dark room, a quiet house, a horizontal position that signals surrender to the night. But there is another version, and that version did not lie down when you did. It is still standing at its post somewhere inside you, scanning the perimeter of your awareness the way a guard scans the tree line beyond a fence, looking not for any specific threat, but for the possibility of threat, a shadow that moves when the others are still, a sound that does not belong to the usual catalog of nighttime sounds. This version of you has been on duty for a very long time. It was on duty when you woke up this morning, present during every meeting and meal, during every quiet moment that was not actually quiet because somewhere beneath the surface it was running its calculations, updating its risk assessments, maintaining the invisible infrastructure of readiness that has become so much a part of who you are that you barely notice it anymore. You are lying in the dark and the room is still, and nothing is happening that requires your attention. This is the objective reality of this moment. The walls are where they have always been. Every door is closed or open, whichever you prefer, and nothing on the other side of it is moving toward you with malicious intent. Above you, the ceiling is doing its ordinary ceiling work of holding up the roof and holding in the warmth, and it has been doing this work reliably for as long as you have lived here without once requiring your supervision. Everything in this room is exactly as it should be. The evidence is overwhelming and entirely one-directional. You are safe. There is nothing to monitor, nothing to anticipate or prevent or solve. Yet, something in you does not believe this. Something in you hears the word safe the way a person who has been lied to hears a promise, with a thin film of skepticism wrapped around every syllable. Safety, for you, has always been conditional, something that might be true right now but could change in the next moment, and so the rational response, the only responsible response, the only responsible response, the only responsible response, is to remain alert to the possibility of that change. Not anxious, not panicked, just ready, perpetually, exhaustingly, stubbornly ready for whatever might come next, even when what comes next is almost certainly nothing more dramatic than the slow passage of hours and the eventual arrival of morning. This readiness has a texture. It lives in the body as a particular quality of tension that is distinct from the ordinary muscle tension of physical exertion. It is not the soreness that follows a long run or the stiffness that accumulates after hours at a desk. It is subtler than that, deeper, more diffuse. It is the tension of a system that is running at a slightly elevated baseline, like a thermostat set 2 degrees higher than necessary, not enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to ensure that the furnace never fully shuts off. Your heartbeat is perhaps a few beats per minute faster than it would be in a genuinely relaxed body. Your breathing sits a little higher in the chest than it needs to. The muscles along the sides of your neck, the ones that orient the head toward potential sources of danger, maintain a level of tonus that is appropriate for someone who might need to turn quickly, but entirely unnecessary for someone who is lying in a dark room with nowhere to turn. This is the cost of being the one who is always on, not the dramatic cost, not the breakdown or the burnout that arise like a thunderclap and forces an immediate reckoning. That cost comes eventually for many people who live this way, but it is not the cost that concerns us now. What concerns us is the quieter cost, one that accumulates in increments so small that no single day's contribution is noticeable, the way a river carves a canyon not through force, but through the patient repetition of flowing water against stone. Each day that the system runs at its elevated baseline, Each night that the guard does not fully stand down, each hour of sleep that is lighter and more fragmented than it needs to be because some part of the nervous system is still listening for the sound that does not come, all of this takes something. It takes from the depth of your rest and from the ease of your waking hours. It drains the reservoir of energy that would otherwise be available for the things that matter to you, creative work and play and unstructured time, the kind of presence that requires not vigilance, but its opposite, a willingness to be fully absorbed in something without also scanning for what might go wrong. You know this person I am describing. You know this person because you are this person, or because you have been this person, or because you are this person right now, lying in the dark with your eyes closed and your mind still running its quiet surveillance protocol, checking the doors, reviewing the day, anticipating tomorrow, cataloging open loops, unresolved tensions and the conversations that did not go quite right, all of it cycling through the background of your awareness like a news ticker that never goes dark. What if this were the 1 hour of the entire day when that ticker could go dark? Not because the information on it is unimportant. It may be very important, but because the ticker itself is not the information. It is a delivery mechanism, and the delivery mechanism does not need to run when no one is reading it. The messages will still be there in the morning. The problems will still exist in the light of day, where they are much easier to address than they are at 11 o'clock at night in the theater of a tired mind. Nothing that the ticker is showing you right now can be acted upon from the horizontal position you currently occupy, which means that every cycle of the display is purely informational, energy spent on awareness that produces no corresponding action, vigilance without utility, readiness without a task to be ready for. This is not a criticism. Please hear that clearly. The part of you that stays on, that watches and monitors and refuses to fully surrender to the night, is not a malfunction. It is not a weakness or a failure of discipline or a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a deeply intelligent response that was shaped by real circumstances in your life. Circumstances that may have required exactly this kind of watchfulness, maybe for your own safety or for the safety of someone you loved, maybe for the maintenance of a situation that would have deteriorated without your constant attention. The watching was necessary once. It may have been necessary for a very long time. The fact that it continues now, even when the original necessity has passed, is not evidence of a problem. It is evidence of how well you learned the lesson, how thoroughly the pattern was encoded into your nervous system, how seriously you took the responsibility of keeping watch. But tonight, in this dark and quiet room, with the day behind you and nothing ahead of you but hours of darkness, you are being invited to consider something that the watchful part of you has been unable to consider while it was on duty. The shift can end. Not permanently, not irrevocably, not in any way that compromises the part of you that knows how to be alert when alertness is genuinely needed. But for now, for these hours, the shift can end. The post can be vacated. The perimeter can go unmonitored, not because the perimeter does not matter, but because the darkness is doing its own kind of monitoring tonight, and the walls are holding, and the quiet is a kind of security that does not require a human guard to maintain it. Belief is not required yet. Feeling it in the body is not required. Some immediate and dramatic release of tension is not required. Simply being here is enough, which you already are, simply letting these words move through the room like a slow current of warm air, touching the places where the vigilance is stored, not to dislodge it by force but to inform it, gently and without urgency, that the conditions have changed. The room is dark. The hour is late. Nothing is coming. The only thing happening in this space right now is a voice speaking and a body lying still, and between those two things, a quality of attention that asks for nothing except the chance to be present in a room where, for once, there is absolutely nothing that needs to be done. Let that be enough. Let that be the beginning. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to become the person who is always watching. There is no application form for this role, no interview process where someone explains the hours, the compensation, or the long-term effects on the body. The role is assumed gradually, through a series of experiences that teach the nervous system a single lesson, repeated in enough variations and with enough variations and with enough variations and with enough variations and with enough it becomes a permanent feature of the intercambal landscape. The lesson is simple. If you stop paying attention, something bad will happen. If you let your guard down, even for a moment, the thing you are watching for will arrive, and it will find you unprepared, and the consequences of being unprepared will be worse than the consequences of being unprepared will be worse than the consequences of never resting. This lesson can be taught in 1,000 different ways. It can be taught by a household where the emotional weather was unpredictable, where a parent's mood could shift from warm to cold without warning, and the only way to stay safe was to read the signals constantly, tracking the pitch of a voice across the room, measuring a footstep on the stairs, listening for that particular quality of silence that meant trouble was gathering behind a closed door. A child in that environment learns to scan the way a soldier learns to scan, not because anyone told them to, but because the alternative, being caught off guard by a sudden change in emotional temperature, was painful enough to rewire the default settings of the nervous system itself. It can be taught by a period of genuine danger, a time in your life when the world was not safe, when the threat was real, when the only thing standing between you and harm was your own ability to see it coming. People who have lived through such times carry the watchfulness forward long after the danger has passed, the way a house retains the smell of smoke long after the fire has been extinguished. The nervous system does not have a calendar. It does not know that the dangerous period ended months or years or decades ago. It knows only that vigilance was once essential, and that lowering the vigilance produced consequences, and that the safest strategy is to maintain the elevated state until further notice, a notice that never arrives because the system has no mechanism for issuing it. It can also be taught by something less dramatic than either of these, by the slow accumulation of responsibilities that were never explicitly assigned but somehow became yours. Somehow you became the person who notices when things are about to go wrong, the one who checks the locks and reviews the finances and remembers the appointments, who anticipates the needs that other people have not yet articulated. None of this happened because you volunteered, but because someone had to be this person, and you were the one with the sensitivity to notice what needed noticing and the conscientiousness to act on what you noticed. Over time, the role solidified around you like plaster around a mold, and now you cannot remember what you were shaped like before the casting, because the role and the self have become so intertwined that removing one from the other seems impossible, or at least impossibly risky, like trying to remove a load-bearing wall without knowing which wall is holding up the ceiling. Lying here tonight, you may not be thinking about any of this consciously. The origins of the watching may be stored in parts of the memory that do not readily present themselves for inspection, filed under "just how I am," or "that is just my personality," or "someone has to do it." These explanations have a surface plausibility that makes them easy to accept and difficult to question. Of course someone has to do it. Of course you are the kind of person who pays attention. These are not insights. They are descriptions of a pattern that has been running for so long that it has achieved the status of identity, and identities are notoriously resistant to the suggestion that they might be optional. But consider, just for a moment, from the safety and privacy of this dark room where no one is listening and no one will know what you considered, the possibility that the watching is not who you are. It is something you do. It is something you do. It is something you learned. It is a behavior that was shaped by circumstances that were real and that mattered and that required exactly this kind of response at the time. The response was intelligent. It was adaptive. It kept you safe, or it kept others safe, or it kept a situation from deteriorating in ways that would have been much harder to manage than the daily cost of maintaining the vigil. The watching was, in its original context, a profoundly sensible strategy. It is only when the context changes and the strategy does not that the watching begins to cost more than it protects. The context has changed. You may not feel that it has, because the nervous system's definition of context is much broader and much stickier than the mind's. Your mind can look around this room and see that it is safe. But the nervous system looks around this room and sees a space that resembles other spaces that were safe until they were not, and it keeps the alert running because the resemblance is never close enough to guarantee that this time will be different. It is operating on a logic that is entirely valid within its own framework, a framework built by experience and reinforced by repetition, and within that framework, the continued vigilance makes perfect sense. It is protective. It is precautionary. It is doing what it was trained to do by the most effective teacher there is, which is lived experience. Here is what matters. The nervous system is not wrong. It is simply right about a world that no longer exists. The rules it learned were accurate for the environment that taught them, in the same way that a map drawn in one century is accurate for the geography of that century. But the terrain has changed. Roads have been built where forests used to be. Rivers have shifted course. The landmarks that once guided the journey are no longer where they were, and the map, for all its original precision, now leads to places that are not quite where they are supposed to be. The nervous system is navigating by an old map, and the old map says, stay alert, stay ready, do not rest until you are certain that no threat is present, and never be certain. Because certainty is a luxury that people who need to stay safe cannot afford. Tonight, in the simple reality of this room, you are being offered something that the old map does not know how to accept, a stretch of hours in which the threat level is genuinely, verifiably, boringly zero. Nothing is happening. Nothing is about to happen. The most exciting event in the foreseeable future of this room is the possibility that a shadow will shift as a cloud moves past whatever light source is still faintly visible through the curtains, and even that is not guaranteed. This is a room in which safety is not conditional, not temporary, not contingent on your continued vigilance. It is structural. It is built into the walls, into locked doors, into the sleeping neighborhood, into the simple and reliable physics of a house that is standing on solid ground in a quiet part of the night. The watchful part of you does not need to accept this immediately. It has been standing guard for years, perhaps for decades, and it is not going to step aside because a voice in the dark told it that the shift was over. Trust is not rebuilt in a sentence. But what can happen? What is already happening if you are still listening and still lying here and still allowing the words to reach whatever part of you is capable of receiving them, is a very small and very tentative opening in the wall of vigilance, a crack just wide enough to admit the possibility that the guard might sit down for a moment. Not leave, not abandon the post. Just sit down, just for a moment, on the chair that has always been there but was never used because sitting felt too much like not watching. The chair is there. The night is long. Nothing is coming through the gate. The guard can sit down. Your mind has a department that never closes. You have probably never named it, never drawn its organizational chart, or written its mission statement. But you know it is there because you can feel it running right now, at this very moment, even as you lie still in a dark room doing nothing. It is the part of your mind that monitors, and its operating hours are continuous, its staff is tireless, and its definition of what constitutes relevant information is so broad that almost nothing escapes its notice. This monitoring takes many forms. In its most obvious version, it is the mental review of open tasks, a scroll through everything that was not completed today and will need to be completed tomorrow, a quiet accounting of obligations and deadlines and promises made and promises not yet kept. This version of the monitoring is familiar to almost everyone who lives a busy life. It is the reason people lie awake composing emails in their heads or rehearsing conversations that have not yet occurred, the mind continuing its project management long after the body has been told that the project day is over. But there is a deeper version of the monitoring that goes beyond task management, a version that is less about what needs to be done and more about what might go wrong. This is the version that scans not the to-do list but the emotional landscape, checking for disturbances the way a seismograph checks for tremors, always looking for the first faint signal that something is shifting beneath the surface. Did that person seem off today? Was there something in the tone of that message that suggested a problem? Is everything okay with the people you love? And if you have not heard from them recently, does the silence mean they are fine, or does it mean something else? Something that your attention could prevent if only you could figure out what it is in time. This deeper monitoring is what makes your vigilance so exhausting, because it operates on a level that the conscious mind cannot fully access or control. You cannot simply decide to stop scanning the emotional weather any more than you can decide to stop noticing the temperature of the air on your skin. The scanning is automatic, wired into the same neural pathways that process facial expressions and vocal tones and the subtle body language that tells you whether a room is friendly or hostile before a single word is spoken. These pathways were designed to run in the background, consuming minimal conscious resources while providing a continuous stream of social and emotional data that helps you navigate the complexities of human relationship and human community. In their original design, they are elegant and efficient, a kind of social sonar that allows you to move through the world with sensitivity and awareness. The difficulty arises when these pathways are running at an elevated level, when the social sonar is turned up from its normal background hum to something closer to active scanning, and it stays there. In a person who has learned that the emotional environment can change suddenly and dangerously, the monitoring intensifies, the sonar sends out pings more frequently. The sensitivity threshold drops, meaning that smaller and smaller signals are enough to trigger a response. A slightly flat tone in someone's voice, which would pass unnoticed by a less vigilant listener, becomes a data point that the monitoring system flags for further analysis. A text message that arrives without the usual warmth becomes evidence of a shift that must be investigated, interpreted, managed before it can escalate into something worse. This is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition operating at a level of sophistication that most people never develop, because most people have never needed to. The person who monitors at this level is not imagining threats. They are detecting real signals that are genuinely present in the social environment, but that most people's monitoring systems are calibrated to ignore because they fall below the threshold of significance. Your threshold is lower. Your system catches what other systems miss. This is a kind of sensitivity that has genuine value, a capacity for reading rooms and reading people that serves you well in many contexts, making you a friend who notices when something is wrong before anyone else does, a partner who picks up on a mood shift before it is spoken, someone who can feel the political temperature of a meeting within seconds of walking through the door. The value is real. What is also real is the cost. Running the monitoring system at this elevated level consumes energy that could otherwise be spent on other things. It fragments attention because part of the mind is always dedicated to the scanning function, leaving less of it available for the task at hand. It creates a background noise of low-level analysis that makes true mental quiet nearly impossible, because true quiet would require turning the sonar off, and turning the sonar off feels, to a system that has learned its lessons well, like turning off the smoke alarm in a house that has already burned once. Right now, lying in this room, the monitoring system is still running. You can probably feel it if you pay attention, the way you might notice the hum of electronics in a house that seemed quiet until you listen carefully. There is a part of your mind that is still tracking the open items, still reviewing the interactions of the day, still listening for signals from the emotional environment, even though the only emotion present in this room right now is the particular kind of tiredness that comes from having monitored everything for an entire day without rest. The system is checking its inputs, and its inputs are returning nothing, because there is nothing to return. Because you are alone in a dark room and the people whose emotional states you have been tracking all day are elsewhere, living their own nights, and their emotional states are, for the duration of these dark hours, entirely outside the range of your sonar. This is an unusual situation for the monitoring mind. It is accustomed to having inputs to process, signals to interpret, patterns to track. The absence of input does not register as peace. It registers as a gap in the data, a blind spot in the surveillance that could be concealing something important. The system's response to the absence of information is to increase its sensitivity, listening harder, searching more actively for the signals it expects to find, the way a person in a very quiet room begins to hear sounds that a noisier environment would have masked. This is why the mind often becomes louder in the silence of the night, not because the night is inherently more threatening, but because the monitoring system, deprived of its usual stream of inputs, turns its attention inward and begins to process the only data available, which is memory and possibility and speculation about what might have been, or what might have happened and what might be happening right now in a part of the world that the sonar can no longer reach. Here is what the monitoring system does not know, and what it cannot learn from its own data. The silence of this room is not a gap in the coverage. It is the coverage itself. The absence of signals is not a failure of detection. It is the most accurate reading the system has produced all day. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is about to go wrong. The silence is telling the truth, and the truth it is telling is profoundly boring by the monitoring system's standards, which is precisely what makes it safe. Danger is interesting. Safety is boring. The monitoring mind has been trained to pay attention to what is interesting, and so it struggles in the presence of genuine safety, because genuine safety produces almost nothing for it to do. Tonight, the monitoring mind does not need to be shut down. It does not need to be overridden or suppressed or argued into submission. It simply needs to be allowed to discover, through direct experience rather than through instruction, that this particular stretch of darkness contains nothing that requires its attention. Each moment of silence that passes without incident is a piece of evidence that the system can file under a category it rarely uses, the category called genuinely safe, requiring no further analysis. The evidence accumulates slowly, one quiet moment at a time, each one adding fractionally to the case for standing down. The case will never be complete because the monitoring system does not traffic in certainty. But it can, over the course of these long and uneventful hours, accumulate enough evidence to shift the balance, to move the needle from actively scanning to passively noticing to something even quieter than that, a state in which the system is still online but running at its lowest power setting, aware enough to register a genuine emergency but no longer searching for one. That shift is available to you tonight. It does not require effort. It requires the opposite of effort. It requires the willingness to let the silence be exactly as boring as it actually is, and to allow the boredom to do its work, which is the ancient and deeply underrated work of convincing the nervous system that it is safe to rest. There is a price for being always available, and the price is not charged in any currency the mind is trained to notice. It does not arrive as a bill or a notification on a screen. It arrives in the body, shows up in the quality of sleep, manifests as a particular flavor of fatigue that persists even after what should have been adequate rest. It arrives in the jaw that aches in the morning from clenching through the night. It arrives in the shoulders that sit a quarter-inch higher than they need to, pulled upward by muscles that have forgotten what it feels like to be genuinely at ease. It arrives in the shallow breath that never quite reaches the bottom of the lungs, because deep breathing requires a kind of surrender that the always ready body does not know how to perform. You have been paying this price for long enough that you may have stopped recognizing it as a price. The ache in the jaw is just what mornings feel like. Tight shoulders are just what shoulders feel like. That tiredness greeting you when you wake, before a single demand has been placed on you, is just what waking feels like when you are a person with responsibilities and a full schedule. These experiences have been normalized so thoroughly that questioning them feels absurd, like questioning the cessation of gravity or the color of the sky. They are facts of your physical life, as unremarkable and as immovable as the furniture in a room you have lived in for years. But they are not facts. They are consequences. Each one is the body's account of what it has been doing while you were not looking, the ledger of costs that the conscious mind never audited because the costs were always small enough to fall below the threshold of concern. A jaw that clenches through the night is burning energy that should be going toward tissue repair and immune function and the deep neurological maintenance that only happens during certain stages of sleep. Shoulders that never fully relax are diverting blood flow to muscles that do not need it, away from organs and systems that do. Shallow breathing is reducing the oxygen supply to every cell in the body by a small but continuous amount, a reduction that is not dangerous in any acute sense but that, over time, changes the chemistry of the blood, reduces the efficiency of organs, limits the brain's access to the resources it needs to function at its best. These costs are invisible to the person paying them because each individual cost is too small to register as a problem. A slightly tired morning. A headache that might be stress or might be dehydration. A feeling of heaviness in the limbs that lasts for an hour after waking, then fades into the background as the caffeine takes hold and the day's demands provide enough stimulation to override the body's quieter complaints. None of these things, taken individually, would prompt a visit to a doctor or a conversation with a friend or even a moment of serious reflection. They are the white noise of a body that is running slightly outside its optimal parameters, day after day, accumulating debt in a currency that no one is counting. The mind is exempt from this accounting because the mind is the one spending the currency. It decides that vigilance is necessary. It determines that the scanning cannot be reduced, that the availability cannot be curtailed, that the readiness is essential to the maintenance of whatever fragile equilibrium the current life situation requires. It makes these determinations based on its own assessment of risk, an assessment that is thorough and intelligent and based on real experience, but that does not include in its calculations the cost that the body is paying to implement its conclusions. When the mind decides that you need to stay alert, it does not submit a budget request to the body's energy management department. It simply redirects the resources and the body complies because the body's relationship to the mind is one of extraordinary loyalty, a loyalty that will endure nearly any abuse before it finally refuses to cooperate. You have seen, perhaps, what that refusal looks like. You may have experienced it yourself, or watched someone you care about experience it, the moment when the body says, simply and without negotiation, no more. This is the burnout that arrives not as a gradual dimming but as a sudden darkness, the collapse that catches everyone by surprise because the person who collapses was, until that moment, apparently fine, apparently functioning, apparently capable of maintaining their extraordinary level of vigilance for one more day, one more week, one more month, indefinitely. Such a collapse is surprising only to the mind, which was not tracking the body's ledger. Your body is not surprised at all. It has been sending memos for months, years perhaps, memos in the form of tension and fatigue and restless sleep and morning stiffness, and all of those memos were filed without being read because the mind's attention was already occupied with whatever threat or task or demand came next. Tonight is not that moment. What is happening here is not the collapse, and these words are not a warning that collapse is imminent. Something different is being offered not from the position of crisis, but from the position of an ordinary night in an ordinary life, A life that is functioning adequately by all external measures, but that is costing more than it needs to cost, carrying a metabolic burden that could be reduced if the readiness were allowed to scale down even slightly during the hours when readiness serves no practical purpose. Right now, your body is lying in the dark and it is ready. But for what, exactly? The question is worth asking, not because the answer is embarrassing, but because the absence of an answer is instructive. The readiness has no object. It is not preparing for a specific event. It is not braced against a particular threat. It is a generalized state, a posture of anticipation that is aimed at everything and therefore at nothing, the neural equivalent of a muscle that is contracted but has no weight to lift, burning energy in the service of a purpose that does not currently exist. The body can release a contraction that serves no purpose. It does this all the time, in fact, thousands of times a day, adjusting its muscular engagement to match the demands of the moment. When you sit down, the leg muscles release. Put down a heavy bag and the arm muscles follow suit. Your body is extraordinarily efficient at matching its expenditure to its activity, and it performs these adjustments automatically, without conscious instruction, because the feedback systems that govern muscle tone are among the oldest and most reliable systems in the human organism. These systems know how to release what is not needed. They have been doing it for millions of years. The system that governs vigilance is different. It runs on a different logic, a logic that is biased toward maintaining readiness even in the absence of threat, because the cost of being caught unprepared is, in the nervous system's ancient calculus, much greater than the cost of being unnecessarily prepared. This asymmetry is built into the architecture. It cannot be eliminated by willpower or by the decision that it would be nice to be more relaxed. It can, however, be gently influenced by the slow and patient accumulation of safety signals, moments in which the environment demonstrates, through its sheer uneventfulness, that the elevated state is not required. This room, this hour, this darkness is generating safety signals with every passing second. Every breath that you take without being interrupted is a signal. Every moment of silence that contains nothing but silence is another one. A heartbeat followed by another heartbeat, in the ordinary, unremarkable rhythm of a body that is not under threat, is a signal. These signals are being received, whether you are conscious of them or not, by the same deep systems that maintain the state of readiness, and they are being added to the ledger on the other side, the side that tracks evidence of safety rather than evidence of threat. The ledger on the safety side has been underfunded for a long time. Tonight, it is receiving deposits. Each quiet moment is a deposit. Each uneventful minute is a contribution to a balance that, when it grows large enough, will allow the readiness to scale back, allow muscles to soften and breathing to deepen, the jaw to unclench, not because you decided to relax, but because the evidence finally became persuasive enough that the system adjusted on its own, the way all well-designed systems adjust when the data they are receiving changes. The data is changing, slowly, quietly, in the most boring possible way. The data is changing. Let it change. Let the deposits accumulate. There is nothing you need to do to help this process except to continue being here, exactly as you are, in a room where nothing is happening, which is exactly what needs to happen. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that belongs to the people who are always available. It is not the exhaustion of physical labor, which has the decency to correspond to something visible, a ditch that was dug, or a load that was moved, or a distance that was traveled. Physical exhaustion comes with its own evidence: sweat, aching muscles, the honest tiredness that follows honest work. The exhaustion of availability comes with no such evidence. There is nothing to point to, nothing to show for it, no accomplishment that justifies the depth of the fatigue. The person who is always available has simply been present, available, on call, and somehow that presence has consumed them more thoroughly than any physical task could have. You may know this exhaustion. You may feel it right now, lying in the dark, wondering why the tiredness in your body feels disproportionate to the events of the day. Perhaps nothing particularly strenuous happened today. Perhaps you did not lift anything heavy or run anywhere or perform any task that would, by ordinary standards, qualify as demanding. What you did instead was something far more draining that happens to leave no visible trace. You were available. You were reachable, responsive, present in the lives of other people in a way that kept a small but continuous channel open between their needs and your awareness. Being available sounds passive. It sounds like something that happens to you rather than something you do, a state of being rather than an expenditure of effort. This is one of the great mischaracterizations of modern life, the idea that availability is simply a condition of existing in a connected world, as natural and as effortless as breathing. Availability is not effortless as breathing. Availability is not effortless. It requires a particular kind of attentional allocation, a dedication of mental resources to the task of remaining responsive, which means that a portion of your attention is always pointed outward, toward the phone that might ring or the message that might arrive or the person who might need something, even when no one is calling, no one is messaging, and no one is messaging, and no one at this particular moment needs anything at all. This outward orientation of attention is the hidden engine of the exhaustion. It is what makes the tiredness so difficult to explain and so difficult to remedy, because the energy is not being spent on any visible task. It is being spent on readiness, on the maintenance of a response capacity that is activated not by actual demands but by the possibility of demands, and the possibility of demands is, in a connected life, essentially infinite. There is always someone who might need you. There is always a situation that might require your input or your opinion or your emotional support. The might is the killer, not the actual demands, which are at least finite and can be completed and set aside, but the anticipation of demands, which is infinite and can never be completed because it is not a task but a state. You have been in this state all day. Before you woke up, in fact, the state was already active because the nervous system does not have a login screen. It broods up with the body, and for people who carry the burden of availability, it broods up already oriented toward the external world, already scanning for signals that someone needs something, already calculating the distance between the current moment and the next likely demand. For some people, the first conscious thought of the day is not about themselves at all. It is about someone else, about what that person needs or how that person is feeling, or whether that situation they were worrying about last night has resolved. The self comes second, if it comes at all, squeezed into the gaps between the needs of others, like a commuter fitting themselves into a crowded train. This is not selflessness, though it may look like selflessness from the outside, and it may have been praised as selflessness by people who benefited from it. True selflessness is a choice made from a position of fullness, a giving that comes from having enough to give. What you are doing is something different. You are giving from a position of depletion, responding to needs from a reservoir that has not been refilled, maintaining an availability that does not account for the cost of maintenance. This is not generosity. This is a pattern, deeply ingrained and rarely examined, in which your own needs have been moved to the bottom of the priority queue so consistently that you may have lost track of what they are. Lying in this room tonight, in the dark, with no one needing anything from you, there is space to notice the shape of your own depletion, not to fix it, not to analyze it, not to construct a plan for better self-care that will be abandoned by Wednesday, just to notice it, the way you might notice a bruise on your arm that you do not remember getting, a quiet observation that does not require action but that contains useful information about how the body has been treated and what it has endured. The depletion has a physical signature. It is there in the heaviness of the eyelids, which are carrying not just the tiredness of a late hour, but the accumulated weight of 1,000 moments of attentional redirection, each one small, each one pulling the focus away from the internal world and toward the external one, each one saying, without words, your experience can wait, someone else's experience needs you first. It is there in the tightness across the forehead, the residual tension of a mind that has been processing not just its own thoughts, but the implied and expressed emotions of everyone it encountered today, performing the constant background computation of how is this person feeling and what do they need from me and how should I adjust my response to match their state. This computation is exhausting. It is among the most energy-intensive operations the brain can perform, more demanding than mathematics or spatial reasoning or any of the cognitive tasks that are conventionally associated with mental effort. Social processing, reading faces, interpreting tones, modeling other minds, generating appropriate responses, all of this runs on the brain's most advanced hardware, the prefrontal and temporal regions that are the most metabolically expensive parts of the human nervous system. When you are always available, these regions are always working, burning glucose and oxygen at a rate that would be unremarkable for a brief social encounter, but that becomes genuinely depleting when it is sustained across an entire day with no rest periods. Right now, in this dark room, those regions are being asked to do nothing. There is no face to read, no tone to interpret, nothing to model, no response to generate. The social processing hardware is, for the first time today, without a task. It may not know what to do with itself. It may generate phantom inputs, recycling the day's social interactions in an attempt to stay busy, replaying conversations and searching for signals it might have missed, second-guessing responses it already gave, previewing interactions it has not yet had. This is the system's equivalent of a spinning wheel, an indicator that the machinery is running but has nothing to process. Let it spin. The spinning is not a problem to be solved. It is the natural behavior of a system that has been in high-demand mode for too long and does not yet trust the absence of demand. The spinning will slow on its own, the way a flywheel slows when the driving force is removed. It will take time. The flywheel is heavy because the driving force was strong and sustained, and heavy flywheels take longer to decelerate than light ones. But the deceleration is already in progress. Each moment you spend here, in the dark, with no one needing anything, is a moment in which the driving force is absent, and each such moment removes a tiny amount of energy from the flywheel, slowing it by an increment so small that you will not feel it happening. You will only notice it later, when the spinning has quieted enough for you to realize that the room is still, and you are still, and the absence of external demand has become, without your conscious participation, a presence of internal peace. That peace is not available to the person who is always available. It arrives only when the availability is suspended, when the channel between other people's needs and your nervous system is briefly, temporarily, safely closed. Tonight, the channel is closed. No one is calling, no one is reaching out. The needs of others are being met by others, or they are not being met at all, and either way, the meeting or not meeting of those needs is not your responsibility for the next several hours, because your only responsibility right now is to be here, in this body, in this bed, doing nothing, needing nothing, available to no one except yourself. This may feel strange. It may feel, paradoxically, like a kind of neglect, as though by withdrawing your availability you're abandoning a post that depends on you. Notice that feeling if it arises, without arguing with it. It is telling you something important about how deeply the pattern of availability has been woven into your sense of identity. To be unavailable feels like being irresponsible, which feels like being unsafe, which triggers the very vigilance that keeps the whole cycle running. But the feeling is not the truth. The truth is that the world, for all its genuine needs and all its real problems, can manage without your attention for one night. It has been managing without it for every night of your life, during the hours when you were asleep and could not have responded to anything even if you had wanted to, and it will manage again tonight, and again tomorrow night, and the night after that, and the fundamental soundness of this arrangement is demonstrated by the simple fact that you are still here, still intact, still lying in a dark room listening to a voice that is asking nothing of you except to remain exactly where you are. Remain where you are. The world will keep turning without your supervision. It always has. Somewhere in the background of your daily experience, there is an emergency. It has been there for so long that you no longer think of it as an emergency, because emergencies, by definition, are supposed to end. They are supposed to have a beginning, a middle, and a resolution, a moment when the sirens stop and the lights come back on and someone in a position of authority announces that the crisis is over and it is safe to return to normal. Your emergency never had that moment. It never reached a clear conclusion. It simply became the weather, the persistent atmospheric condition in which your life unfolds, too constant to be remarkable but too present to be ignored. This emergency is not about any single thing. It is not a crisis with a name or a deadline or a specific set of consequences that can be identified and addressed. It is more diffuse than that, a generalized sense that something is not quite right, that the current situation, whatever the current situation happens to be, is precarious in ways that require your continued attention. The finances could be tighter than they should be, or the relationship could be one difficult conversation away from a different shape, or the work could be one missed deadline away from consequences that you do not want to think about, but cannot stop thinking about. None of these things are emergencies in the traditional sense. None of them require the immediate mobilization of resources that the word emergency implies. But they create a background radiation of concern that does not dissipate when the day ends, because the day ending does not resolve them. It simply pauses them, puts them in a holding pattern until morning, when they will resume their orbit around the center of your attention as though they never left. Living with this kind of background emergency is like living next to a highway. At first, the noise is overwhelming, impossible to ignore. Then, over time, something remarkable happens. The nervous system adjusts its threshold, raises the bar for what qualifies as noteworthy, and the highway noise drops out of conscious awareness. It is still there, still producing the same decibels, still vibrating the windows and rattling the cups in the cabinet, but it no longer registers as noise. It registers as nothing, as silence, as the baseline against which all other sounds are measured. The adjustment is so complete that it becomes invisible, and the person living next to the highway genuinely believes, because their experience confirms it, that they live in a quiet neighborhood. Your emergency is the highway. It is the noise that you have stopped hearing because you have heard it for so long. It is the concern that you have stopped noticing because it has been present for so many consecutive days that it has been absorbed into the texture of normalcy. The fact that you are not consciously worried right now does not mean the emergency is not running. It means the emergency has been integrated, processed by the nervous system's adaptation machinery into something that no longer triggers a conscious alarm, but that still, beneath the surface, maintains the elevated baseline that the alarm originally established. This is why you are tired in a way that sleep does not fix. Sleep is happening on top of the emergency, which is happening on top of the adaptation, which is happening on top of the original concern, like geological layers pressing down on each other with increasing weight. Your body sleeps, but it sleeps in the way that a person naps in an airport, light enough to respond if something changes, alert enough to notice if the situation shifts, never fully descending into the deep, unguarded rest that the body needs to perform its most essential maintenance. The deep rest, the kind that rebuilds and restores, requires a level of surrender that the background emergency does not permit, because surrender means taking the eyes off the situation and taking the eyes off the situation and taking the eyes off the situation according to the nervous system's logic is how situations become actual emergencies, the kind with sirens and consequences, and the knowledge that if you had just been paying attention, you could have prevented this. You could not have prevented this. Whatever the background emergency is, whatever the ambient concern that has been running in the low frequencies of your awareness for weeks or months or years, it is not the kind of thing that is solved by vigilance. Alertness can protect against sudden threats, against the predator in the bushes, the car running the red light, or the email that needs to be answered before the deadline passes. Vigilance is excellent at responding to acute situations with clear parameters and defined endpoints. It is useless, worse than useless, against the kind of chronic, ambient, shapeless concern that constitutes most modern anxiety, because this kind of concern does not have parameters or endpoints. It has horizons, and horizons, by definition, recede as you approach them. Lying here tonight in the dark, you are being asked to do something that feels counterintuitive to every instinct the emergency has trained into you, asked to turn away from the horizon, face the other direction, look not at the thing you have been watching but at the thing you have been turning your back on, which is the present moment in all its unremarkable, uneventful, boring specificity. This moment, this one, the one in which you are breathing while the room stays dark, while the sheets touch your skin and the pillow is supporting the weight of a head that has been carrying too many concerns for too many days. This moment has no emergency in it, not a suspended emergency in it, not a suspended emergency, not an emergency that is waiting politely outside the door until you are ready to deal with it again. This moment is genuinely, entirely, almost aggressively free of anything that qualifies as urgent. The word urgent is doing important work in that sentence. The concerns of your life are real. They are not fabrications of an anxious mind. Finances and relationships, work and health, whatever particular flavor of concern has been seasoning your days, these things exist and they matter, and they will, in the appropriate time and place, benefit from your thoughtful attention. But urgent is not the same as important. And important is not the same as requiring attention at 11 o'clock at night while lying in a dark room. Almost nothing in your life meets this last criterion. The concerns that seem to demand your attention right now are demanding it not because the present moment requires it, but because the monitoring system does not distinguish between times when attention is productive and times when attention is merely habitual. It runs the same program at midnight that it runs at noon, because no one ever installed a clock in the monitoring system's operating room. It does not know what time it is. It only knows that the concerns are still active, and active concerns require active monitoring, regardless of whether the monitoring can produce any useful output given the constraints of the current situation, which include, at minimum, the fact that you are horizontal, in pajamas, in the dark, and entirely unable to act on any of the information the monitoring system is providing. Tonight, for these hours, let the concerns be important without being urgent. Let them exist in the part of your awareness that knows they are real without also insisting that they must be attended to now. They can wait, not because they do not matter, but because you matter too, and what matters to you right now, whether you know it or not, is rest that goes deeper than the surface layer the background emergency permits. Rest that reaches the places in the body where the tension has been stored for so long that the body has forgotten it is there. Rest that includes, in its deepest registers, the experience of a nervous system that is not monitoring anything, not tracking anything, not maintaining any background process related to the management of chronic concern. That kind of rest is available tonight. It begins not with the resolution of the emergency, but with the recognition that the emergency, whatever it is, cannot be resolved from this room, at this hour, in this position. It can only be carried, and carrying is what you have been doing. carrying it has been so constant and so consuming that you may have forgotten that carrying is a choice that can be temporarily suspended without the thing being carried falling to the ground and shattering. You can set it down, not forever, just for tonight, just for these hours. Set it on the nightstand or on the floor next to the bed. Leave it anywhere that is not inside your body and let the body discover, perhaps for the first time in a very long while, what it feels like to lie down without carrying anything at all. The night will hold it for you. The dark will keep it safe. Nothing will happen to it while you are not looking. In the morning, if you want it back, it will be there, exactly where you left it, patient and unchanged, waiting for the version of you that has daylight, energy, and resources to pick it up again. But that version is not you, not right now. Right now, you are the version that gets to put it down. This is your shift, the one where you are off duty, where the only thing you are responsible for is breathing and being warm and letting the heavy eyelids do what heavy eyelids want to do, which is close, softly, like a door shutting on a room that does not need guarding. Let them close. There was a time before the watching. This is easy to forget because the watching has been going on for so long that it has overwritten the earlier memories, not erasing them but pushing them further from the surface, the way a city built on top of an older city eventually makes the older streets invisible, still there beneath the pavement but no longer part of the lived experience of the people walking above them. The watching is the current city, the one you navigate daily, and its streets and buildings and routines are so familiar that the idea of a different landscape existing underneath seems theoretical, an archaeological curiosity rather than a lived reality. But the earlier landscape was real. There was a version of you that did not monitor, did not scan, did not maintain a constant assessment of the emotional weather. This version was not naive. It was not unaware. It was simply operating with a different set of assumptions about the world, assumptions that had not yet been challenged by the experiences that would eventually challenge them. The world, in this earlier version's understanding, was a place where things could be trusted to go mostly well without constant supervision, where other people could be relied upon to manage their own emotions without your intervention, where the future could be left to unfold without being pre-analyzed and pre-managed and pre-worried into a shape that the anxious mind could accept. You may not remember this version clearly. Memory is a poor archivist, especially when it comes to states of being rather than specific events. You may remember events from that time, moments and places and people, but the quality of your experience during those events, the particular feeling of inhabiting a nervous system that was not running its surveillance protocols at full capacity, that feeling may be mostly gone, faded into the general blur of before, a category that the mind uses to contain everything that preceded the current way of being without examining any of it too closely. But the body remembers what the mind has filed away. The body has a longer memory and a more literal one, a memory that is stored not in narratives but in patterns of tension and release, in the baseline tonus of muscle fibers and how the diaphragm rests and where the breath settles when no one is watching. The body remembers what it felt like to breathe all the way to the bottom of the lungs without the shallow caution that currently limits each inhale. It remembers what it felt like to have a jaw that rested naturally open, teeth slightly apart, no pressure, no grinding, just the relaxed weight of bone hanging in the sling of muscle and tendon that was designed to hold it without effort. It remembers shoulders that sat low, neck muscles that were soft, a belly that was not braced against impact. These memories are not sentimental. They are structural. They are encoded in the same tissues that currently hold the tension, which means that the tension is not a permanent alteration, but an overlay, a pattern that was laid on top of the body's original pattern, the way a stencil is laid on top of a surface before the paint is applied. The stencil can be removed. The original surface is still underneath. This is not a metaphor for positive thinking or a suggestion that you can simply decide to return to the pre-vigilance state through an act of will. The stencil was applied by experiences that were real and that had real consequences, and removing it is not a matter of deciding that those experiences do not matter. They matter enormously. What does not matter, what is not required, is the continued application of the stencil in an environment where the original reason for the stencil no longer exists. Right now, in this dark room, the stencil is still applied. Muscles are still holding the pattern that was imprinted by whatever taught you to watch. Breath is still shallow. Jaw is still engaged. Shoulders are still elevated by that fraction of an inch that marks the difference between a body at rest and a body at rest that is also ready. But underneath all of that, in the deeper layers of muscle and fascia and connective tissue, the original pattern is still there, as patient and as durable as stone beneath sand. It has been waiting, not with any conscious intent, because tissue does not have intent, but with the simple structural persistence of a shape that was built first and built well. Consider what it would be like to feel that original shape again, not to achieve it, not to work toward it, not to add it to the list of things you should be doing for your health and well-being, just to feel it, the way you might feel the warmth of sunlight on your face without trying to capture the sunlight or measure it or make it last longer than it naturally will. The feeling is available in small doses, in moments when the vigilance slips, when a particularly deep breath escapes before the monitoring system can catch it and rein it back to the approved depth. In those moments, which are brief and often startling, the original pattern asserts itself. A jaw drops a millimeter, shoulders descend, the belly softens, and for an instant, the body is what it was before the watching began, open and unguarded and genuinely at rest. Those moments happen more frequently in the dark. They happen more frequently when the body is lying down. They happen more frequently when the environment is quiet and safe and undemanding, because these are the conditions that most closely resemble the conditions in which the original pattern was formed, the conditions of infancy and early childhood, when the body's first experience of the world was, in most cases, one of being held and warm and fed, safe enough that the nervous system could devote its resources to growth rather than to defense. The body formed its original pattern in those conditions, and when those conditions are recreated, even partially, even imperfectly, the body begins to remember. This room is warm. It is dark. It is quiet. No one is asking anything of you. These conditions are not identical to the ones in which the original pattern was formed, but they share enough features to activate the body's deep memory, a memory that lives not in the brain's narrative centers but in muscles and fascia and the autonomic nervous system itself. Under these conditions, the body's older programming begins to stir, something that predates the watching, something that knows how to rest without monitoring, how to breathe without restriction, how to exist in a space without scanning it for threats. This programming has been dormant, not dead. Dormancy is the body's way of storing capabilities that are not currently in use but that may be needed again, the way a seed stores the instructions for an entire tree inside a structure small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. The seed does not need to do anything to retain its potential. It simply needs to be placed in the right conditions, and the conditions will do the rest. Warm soil, adequate moisture, sufficient light, these are the inputs, and the output is growth, unforced, organic, arising not from effort, but from the alignment of conditions with the inherent tendencies of the organism. In this analogy, you are the seed, and this dark room is the soil, and the warmth of the blankets is the warmth of the earth, and the quiet is the moisture that soaks into the layers of tension and begins, slowly, without drama, to soften what has been hard for too long. Growth is not required. Change is not required. Simply being here is enough, in conditions that are favorable to the body's natural processes, and let those processes do what they have always known how to do, which is move toward balance, move toward ease, move toward the ace, move toward the shape that the body had before the watching taught it to have a different one. The older shape is still there. It has been there all along, underneath the vigilance, underneath the readiness, underneath the tension that you have carried for so long that you thought it was part of you. It is not part of you. It is something that happened to you, something that was laid over the original architecture of the body in response to experiences that required it, and it can be set aside, not permanently, not irrevocably, not in any way that leaves you unprotected when protection is actually needed, but for now, for these hours, it can be set aside when you come in from the cold, gratefully, gently, without resentment toward the coat that kept you warm when warmth was what you needed. The coat is off, the room is warm, you are lying in the dark, and somewhere beneath the layers of learned tension, the original shape of your body is still there, patient, durable, waiting. Between one anxious thought and the next, there is a gap. It is small, often no more than the space between two heartbeats, and it passes so quickly that the thinking mind rarely notices it. The mind is a narrative machine, constructing seamless stories from discrete moments, and the gaps between moments are edited out with the same efficiency that a film editor removes the dead frames between takes. What reaches consciousness is a continuous stream of thought, concern following concern, with no apparent space between them, each one leading naturally to the next in a chain of association that feels inevitable and unbroken. But the chain is not unbroken. There are links and there are spaces between the links, and the spaces, though brief, are real. They are moments of genuine neural quiet, intervals in which the monitoring system has completed one scan and has not yet begun the next, in which the last anxious thought has finished its loop and the next one has not yet formed. These intervals are not emptiness. They are a different kind of fullness, the fullness of a mind that is, for a fraction of a second, not engaged in its habitual activity and is therefore available to something else entirely. You have probably experienced these gaps without recognizing them. They are the moments when the stream of thought suddenly falters, when the mental narrative trips over itself and there is a brief, disorienting silence before the next thought picks up where the last one left off. Most people experience these gaps as lapses, as failures of concentration, as the annoying blank that arrives when you walk into a room and forget why you came. But they are not failures. They are glimpses of the mind's underlying substrate, a quiet field on which all thought occurs and against which all mental noise is defined. The thought is the figure. The silence is the ground. Most people spend their entire lives looking at the figure and never noticing the ground because the figure is moving and the ground is still, and motion captures attention while stillness does not. Tonight, lying in the dark, the balance between figure and ground is beginning to shift. The thoughts are still coming, still running their familiar routes through the familiar territories of concern and anticipation and review. But the spaces between them may be getting slightly wider, fractionally longer, as the body settles, as arousal decreases, as the monitoring system begins its reluctant deceleration. Each gap, when it comes, is a tiny opening, a brief window through which a different kind of awareness is visible, the kind that does not need to think in order to know, that does not need to analyze in order to understand, that does not need to monitor in order to be present. This awareness is not exotic. It is not the product of decades of meditation practice or some transcendent spiritual achievement. It is simply what a nervous system defaults to when it is not actively engaged in threat detection, the resting state that emerges when scanning stops. Water returns to stillness when the wind stops blowing. It has been there all along, underneath the monitoring, underneath the constant computation, as reliable and as unnoticed as the floor beneath a rug. The monitoring is the rug. It covers the floor so completely that the floor is forgotten. But the floor is what holds everything up. The floor is what makes the room a room. Finding this awareness is not necessary. Cultivating it, or practicing it, or developing a technique for accessing it is not necessary. What is necessary is only the cessation of the thing that obscures it, which is the constant, exhausting, habitual scanning that the monitoring mind has been performing without pause for as long as you can remember. Even a deliberate stopping is not required. What helps is allowing the conditions, darkness, and quiet and warmth, the absence of demand, to do their work, which is the work of gradually reducing the monitoring system's power supply until it can no longer maintain its elevated state and begins, by default, to subside. The subsiding is already happening. You may not be able to feel it yet, because the change is occurring at a level below the threshold of conscious detection in the deep structures of the brainstem and the autonomic ganglia, where the body's arousal systems are governed by chemical gradients rather than by conscious intention. These systems are responding to the environment, which is telling them, in the only language they understand, that the conditions for high alert are not present. Light level is low. Ambient noise is minimal. Your body's position is horizontal, which the arousal system interprets as a signal that the organism is not in motion and therefore not in immediate need of the heightened awareness that accompanies movement. These are simple inputs producing simple outputs, and the outputs, taken together, amount to a gentle downward pressure on the body's overall level activation. Allow the pressure. It is not forceful. It is not asking you to collapse or to let go of anything suddenly. It is simply the weight of the night, pressing down on the arousal system the way a hand might press down on a balloon, slowly enough that the balloon does not pop but firmly enough that the air inside it gradually compresses. Your vigilance is the balloon. Night is the hand. What happens next is the compression that occurs when a body that has been inflated with alertness all day is allowed to exist in an environment where alertness serves no function. There is a particular quality to these gaps that becomes more apparent as they widen. It is not blankness, not the static of an empty channel, or the dull void of dreamless unconsciousness. It is more like the quality of air in a room that has just been opened after a long time sealed, a freshness that has nothing to do with content and everything to do with the absence of staleness. When a gap appears between two thoughts, the air inside it is fresh in exactly this way, untouched by analysis, unclouded by interpretation, simply present, simply open, a small clearing in a forest that has been dense for miles. You may find yourself lingering in one of these clearings without meaning to, pausing in the gap the way a walker pauses at a bend in a trail where the view suddenly opens up and the horizon becomes visible for the first time in hours. There is no need to do anything with the view. There is no need to photograph it or describe it or remember it for later. The view exists. You are in it. That is the entire transaction. As the night deepens and the body continues its slow descent towards sleep, these clearings will become more frequent. They will begin to merge, the way puddles merge after a long rain, individual pools of stillness running together to form something larger, something with more surface area, something that reflects more sky. The thoughts do not stop. Exactly, they become smaller, thinner, less insistent, like voices heard from a great distance, still speaking but no longer requiring a response. You can hear them without listening to them. You can notice them without attending to them. The distinction is important because attending is an active process that requires energy and direction, while noticing is passive, effortless, requiring nothing more than the fact of consciousness itself, which is always present whether it is noticed or not. Between one thought and the next, there is a gap. The gap may be getting wider. Notice it if you notice it. Ignore it if you do not. It does not require your attention or your approval. It is simply what happens when the monitoring system begins to run out of material to process, when the stream of concerns thins to a trickle, and the trickle reveals, for the first time all day, the quiet substrate beneath it. This substrate has no opinion about your concerns. It has no opinion about anything. It is simply the space in which everything occurs, a silence from which every thought arises and to which every thought returns, as steady and as patient as the dark room in which you are lying, which has been here all along, holding you without asking for anything in return. Gaps will widen, thoughts will thin, monitoring will slow. None of this requires your participation. It requires only your continued presence in a room where nothing is happening and the willingness to let nothing continue happening for as long as the night will allow. Nobody ever told you that you could stop. This is such a simple observation that it might seem trivial, but it is not trivial. It is one of the most important facts about the shape your life has taken, and it explains more about the quality of your nights and the depth of your rest than any sleep hygiene checklist ever could. Nobody sat you down and said that you could stop watching, stop monitoring, stop holding the threads of other people's lives in your hands as though dropping them would cause the entire fabric to unravel. Nobody ever sat you down and said, clearly and without qualification, the way you might explain something to a child who has been laboring under a misunderstanding, you do not have to do this anymore. You can put this down. You have done enough. Perhaps no one told you because no one noticed. The watching is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not disrupt meetings or interfere with social obligations or produce symptoms that would alarm a doctor during a routine checkup. The person who is always monitoring appears, to the outside world, to be a person who is simply very organized, very attentive, very responsible, and these are compliments in a culture that values productivity and reliability above almost everything else. The monitoring gets praised, which means it gets reinforced, which means it gets harder to stop, because stopping something that receives praise feels like giving up something valuable, something that forms part of your identity as a competent and caring human being. Perhaps no one told you because the people closest to you were benefiting from it. This is not an accusation but an observation. When one person in a family or a friendship or a partnership takes on the role of the watcher, the others are relieved of that burden, and the relief is so complete and so comfortable that it rarely gets examined. Why would anyone question an arrangement that works in their favor? The person who monitors handles the logistics, notices the problems, anticipates the needs, manages the emotional climate. Everyone else gets to be less careful, less attentive, more relaxed because the watcher is covering their share of the vigilance. The arrangement is unfair, but unfairness that benefits the majority tends to be invisible to the majority, and so the arrangement persists, unexamined, unquestioned, maintained by the silence of the people who benefit and the exhaustion of the person who does the work. Perhaps no one told you because you never asked. This is the possibility that is hardest to sit with, because it suggests that the permission was available all along, waiting to be claimed, and you did not claim it, not because you did not want it, but because claiming it felt like something you were not allowed to do. The monitoring mind is, among other things, a mind that is very good at predicting consequences, and the predicted consequence of stopping, putting down the vigil, admitting that you are tired and that the watching is too much and that you need someone else to take a shift. The predicted consequence of all of this is catastrophe, collapse of the arrangements that depend on your attention, failure of the systems you maintain, exposure of the vulnerability that the watching was designed to conceal. These predictions are wrong. They are wrong not because the situations you are monitoring are unimportant, but because the predictions are based on a model of the world in which you are the only load-bearing structure, the single point of failure whose removal would bring everything crashing down. This model was convincing when it was formed, because it was formed in circumstances where it was true, or close enough to true that the difference did not matter. There may have been a time in your life when you were, in fact, the only one who could hold things together, who was paying attention, whose vigilance stood between the current situation and something much worse. In that time, the model was accurate. You were essential. Your watching was necessary. The cost was real, but the alternative was worse. That time may have passed. Circumstances may have changed. People around you may be more capable than the model gives them credit for. Systems you are maintaining may be more resilient than the model assumes. Life itself may be more forgiving of your absence than the monitoring mind, with its bias toward catastrophic prediction, is willing to admit. But the model has not been updated, because updating the model would require a period of reduced monitoring, a test of the hypothesis that things will not fall apart if you look away, and the monitoring mind will not authorize that test because authorizing the test would mean accepting the possibility that the monitoring itself is optional, and accepting that the monitoring is optional feels, to a mind that has organized itself around the necessity of monitoring, like accepting that a fundamental part of itself is unnecessary, of monitoring, like accepting that affirmative for Kaid. Lying in this room in the dark, you are conducting the test whether you intended to or not. Every hour that you spend here, not monitoring, not scanning, not holding the threads, is an hour of data that challenges the model. So far, the data is remarkably boring. Nothing has happened. Nothing has fallen apart. No catastrophe has emerged from the brief gap in your surveillance. The threads you dropped when you lay down are lying on the ground, unattended, and the ground is holding them without difficulty. Because the ground is much sturdier than the model predicted and the threads are much lighter than they seemed when you were holding them. So here is the permission that no one ever gave you, offered now, in the dark, by a voice that has no authority and no stake in the outcome, no ability to enforce or retract or attach conditions. You can stop. Not forever. Not in any way that requires you to abandon the responsibilities that genuinely need your attention. Just for now. Just for these hours. You can let the watch end, let the vigil lapse, let the monitoring system power down to its lowest setting while the night does what the night has always done, which is cover the world in darkness and give every living thing a few hours in which to stop performing and simply exist. Enough has been done for today. Enough watching, enough holding, enough carrying, enough noticing. The day received your full attention from the first waking thought to this moment, and it used your attention freely, without gratitude, without acknowledgement, the way the world always uses the attention of the people who have the most to give. The day took what it needed. Now the night is here, and the night takes nothing. The night is the one part of the cycle that runs on absence rather than presence, darkness rather than light, stillness rather than motion. The night does not need your vigilance. It needs your surrender. That word may land differently in your body than it would in someone else's. Surrender, for the person who has been watching, is not the peaceful letting go that meditation teachers describe. It is more complicated than that. It carries undertones of danger and vulnerability, a sense of the exposure that comes from lowering a defense that has been up for so long that it feels load-bearing. To surrender is to remove the defense and discover what is behind it, and what is behind it might be pain, or grief, or the exhaustion that has been accumulating behind the wall of vigilance for longer than you care to count. Let it be behind there. Whatever is behind the defense can wait. This is not about processing or understanding. It is about the simplest and most radical act available to a nervous system that has been in high alert mode for too long, which is to do nothing at all, absolutely nothing at all, absolutely nothing. Not the productive nothing of meditation, not the virtuous nothing of mindfulness, not the strategic nothing of mektas as self-care, just nothing, an absence of doing, a void where effort used to be. A blank, beautiful space that exists when the watching stops and nothing replaces it. You have permission to enter that space. No one gave you this permission before, so it is being given now. Take it or leave it, but know that it is here, available, unconditioned, waiting in the dark like the rest that has been waiting there all along. There is a part of you that has been standing at the gate for as long as you can remember. It does not have a face or a name. It is not a voice in the head, exactly, though it sometimes speaks through the voice in the head. It is more like a posture, a way of orienting toward the world that is so fundamental to your experience that trying to identify it is like trying to see the lens you are looking through. It is the guardian, the part of you that decided, a very long time ago, that someone had to keep watch, and that someone was you. The guardian is not the enemy. This needs to be said clearly, because in many conversations about anxiety and hypervigilance and the costs of chronic stress, the protective mechanisms of the mind are treated as adversaries to be defeated, obstacles to be overcome, symptoms to be medicated into silence. This framing misses something essential about the guardian, which is that it came into being for a reason, and the reason was love. The guardian is not a malfunction. It is a response to a situation that required protection, and the protection it provides is not random or arbitrary. It is targeted, specific, shaped by the exact contours of the threat that originally called it into existence. If you were raised in an environment where emotional stability could not be taken for granted, the guardian learned to monitor emotional cues with extraordinary precision, because in that environment, reading the room was not a social skill but a survival skill. If you experienced a period of instability or danger, the guardian learned to scan for the first signs of a recurrence, because early detection was the only tool that worked when the threat was real. If you took on responsibility for others at an age when you were not yet equipped for it, the guardian learned to be always available, always ready, always one step ahead of the next need, because falling behind meant that someone you cared about would go without something they required. In every case, the guardian's strategy was intelligent. It was the best available response to a difficult situation, crafted by a mind that was doing its absolute best with the resources it had at the time. The fact that the strategy persists long after the situation has changed is not evidence of a problem with the guardian. It is evidence of how well the guardian learned its lesson, how thoroughly the threat was imprinted, how seriously the responsibility was taken. The guardian does not know that the situation has changed, because the guardian does not operate on the level of conscious understanding. It operates on the level of pattern matching, and the patterns it was trained to recognize are still everywhere, and the slight edge in a colleague's voice that matches the edge in a parent's voice decades ago, or in the silence that follows a text message sent hours ago, or in the vague sense of precariousness that accompanies any period of stability, because stability, in the guardian's experience, has always been the prelude to disruption. Lying here in the dark, you might be able to feel the guardian's presence, not as a thought, but as a physical sensation, a quality of readiness in the body that persists despite the complete absence of anything to be ready for. The guardian is at its post, scanning the perimeter of the dark room with the same diligence it brings to every environment, searching for whatever threat justifies its existence, whatever signal confirms its necessity. In a bright and busy room full of people and stimuli, this activity has plenty of material to work with, blending into the general noise of daily experience. In a dark and silent room with nothing to scan, it becomes more noticeable, the way a single instrument becomes audible when the rest of the orchestra stops playing. Listen to the instrument, not with the intention of silencing it, not with the therapeutic goal of understanding it so that it can be managed or resolved. Listen to it the way you would listen to a song that is being played for you by someone who has been playing it for a very long time, someone who has never had an audience, someone whose music has been running in the background of your life for years without ever being acknowledged or appreciated or even heard. The guardian has been playing its song for you since the beginning, a song of protection and watchfulness and fierce, tireless devotion to the task of keeping you safe, and it has never once been thanked. Thank it now, silently, privately, in whatever way feels authentic, not with gratitude that is performed or forced, but with the simple recognition that this part of you has been working very, very hard for a very long time, and it has been working on your behalf, and the work, however costly, came from a place of genuine care. The guardian did not choose to be the guardian. It was conscripted by circumstances, drafted into service by a nervous system that needed protection and found it in the only place it could, which was within itself. The guardian is you, a specialized, dedicated, tireless version of you whose entire existence has been oriented around a single purpose: keep safe, keep watching, do not let down the guard. Consider what this version of you has endured. Not just the effort of watching, which is considerable, but the loneliness of watching alone, an isolation that belongs to the one who sees what others miss and cannot explain what it sees because the seeing happens below the level of language. The guardian operates in a realm that words do not easily reach, the realm of sensation and instinct, of wordless recognition that something is slightly wrong in the way a room feels or the way a silence lands. To carry this kind of knowledge without being able to articulate it, to act on perceptions that other people do not share and that the conscious mind cannot always verify, is a form of solitude that does not diminish with company. You can be in a room full of people and still be the only one who is watching, the only one who has noticed that the atmosphere has shifted, and the gap between what you perceive and what others perceive is a gap that cannot be bridged by conversation because conversation operates on the wrong frequency. This solitude is part of what makes the guardian so tired. It is not merely the energy of vigilance that depletes it, but the absence of companionship in the vigil, the fact that nobody else is standing at this particular post, nobody else has this particular view, nobody else carries this particular burden of awareness. The guardian has been doing its work in private, invisible, unrecognized, for so long that the work itself has become invisible even to you, the person it is protecting. You forgot the guardian was there, or you mistook it for anxiety, or you assumed it was a character flaw rather than a survival strategy, and in all these misrecognitions, the guardian continued its work, faithful and uncomplaining, needing nothing from you except, perhaps, this moment of acknowledgement, this quiet nod in the dark, this recognition that the watching was real and that the watcher did not watch for nothing. Tonight, the guardian is not being asked to leave, not being asked to abandon its post or accept that its vigilance was wasted or concede that the threat it has been watching for is never coming. What is being asked is something much smaller and much kinder, simply to rest. Not to retire, not to resign, just to rest, the way any person who has been working without a break for years deserves to rest, with the assurance that the post will still be there in the morning, that the gate will still need guarding, that all the skills and sensitivity and hard-won pattern recognition that the guardian has developed over a lifetime of watching will not be lost or diminished by a single night of sleep. The guardian can rest. Every gate is locked. Every wall is high. Night itself is standing watch with its ancient and impersonal vigilance, a darkness that conceals nothing because there is nothing to conceal, a silence that monitors everything by monitoring nothing. The night has been doing this job since before the guardian existed, since before the concept of watching was invented by a nervous system that had something to lose. The night is the oldest guardian there is, and it is on duty tonight, and its record is impeccable. Let the guardian sit down. Let the guardian close its eyes. The gate is secured. The perimeter is clear. Nothing is coming through the darkness that requires a human guard to meet it. The night is here, and the night is enough. You have been lying here for some time now, long enough for the initial restlessness to have passed through its peak and begun its descent, long enough for the thoughts that were running hot when you first lay down to have cooled to a simmer, long enough for the body to have made at least some of the adjustments that it makes when it finally accepts that the horizontal position is not temporary, that the darkness is not a brief interruption in the day's programming, but an actual shift in the operation parameters. Something is happening in this room that is difficult to describe because it is, by nature, the opposite of an event. Nothing is happening. Nothing has been happening for some time, and nothing continues to happen with a steadiness and a reliability that would be deeply unimpressive to anyone looking for excitement, but that is, for a nervous system accustomed to constant stimulation, genuinely disorienting. The nothing is not neutral. It is active. It has a quality. It presses against the surfaces of the mind the way atmospheric pressure presses against the surfaces of the body, unnoticed under normal conditions but profoundly felt when the normal conditions change, when the pressure drops or rises, when the environment shifts from the high stimulation atmosphere of the day to the low stimulation atmosphere of the night. Your nervous system is adjusting to the pressure change. This adjustment is not comfortable, or rather, it is not comfortable yet, because the discomfort is the adjustment. It is the sensation of a system that has been calibrated for a high-pressure environment encountering a low-pressure one and trying to find its new equilibrium. The discomfort is temporary. It is the body's version of the ear popping that happens when a plane descends, a physical correlate of a pressure differential that will resolve itself once the system has had enough time to equalize. While the equalization happens, there is nothing to do. This is the strangest part, the part that the always-on mind finds most difficult to accept. There is nothing to do about the adjustment. There is no technique that accelerates it, no breathing pattern that speeds the equalization, nothing that can be thought to make the nothing happen faster or more efficiently. The body is on its own timeline, running its own processes at its own speed, and the mind's contribution to this process is most valuable when it consists of absolutely nothing. Consider the word nothing itself, worth sitting with, here in the dark, because it is a word that the monitoring mind has very little experience with. The monitoring mind is a doing mind, perpetually active, deriving its sense of purpose from activity itself, and that derives its sense of purpose from that activity. When the activity stops, the mind does not experience peace. It experiences disorientation, a vertigo born from spinning for so long that stillness feels like movement. The monitoring mind, deprived of external input, turns on itself, begins to process itself, begins to monitor its own monitoring, creating a recursive loop of self-referential activity that produces the illusion of busyness in the absence of anything to be busy about. This loop is running right now, perhaps. The mind may be thinking about thinking, worrying about worrying, monitoring the fact that the monitoring has not stopped, analyzing the failure to stop analyzing. This is normal. This is what the monitoring mind does when it encounters a void. It fills the void with itself, because the void is intolerable, because the void, to a mind that has organized itself around the continuous processing of threat-related information, feels like death, like dissolution, like the terrifying prospect of a self that exists without a function. But the void is not death or dissolution. It is what remains when the function is temporarily suspended, and what remains is much larger and much quieter and much more peaceful than the function ever led you to believe. All of it, monitoring, scanning, constant vigilant processing, all of this occupies a surprisingly small portion of the mind's total capacity. The way the noise of a highway occupies a surprisingly small portion of the total acoustic spectrum. Remove the highway noise and you do not get silence. You get everything else: bird song, wind, the creaking of trees and the distant hum of the earth itself, a symphony of subtle sounds that were always there but were masked by the louder, more insistent frequency of the traffic. The nothing that is happening in this room right now is not silence. It is everything else. It is the sound of your breathing, which has been happening all along but which you may only now be hearing in its full complexity, the intake and the release, the slight pause at the top and the longer pause at the bottom. It is the sensation of the sheets against your skin, which has been constant since you laid down but which you may only now be feeling in its full specificity, texture, temperature, the slight weight of the fabric against the fine hairs on your arms. It is the darkness itself, which is not the absence of vision but a kind of vision in its own right, a field of perception that the eyes continue to process even with nothing to process, generating soft patterns of dark and slightly less dark that shift and drift behind the closed lids like clouds in a night sky. All of this has been here, waiting, while the monitoring mind was busy with scans, assessments, endless reviews of the day's data. The nothing was not empty. It was full of everything the monitoring was too loud to hear. Now the monitoring is quieting, not because it has been forced to quiet, but because it has begun to run out of fuel, the fuel of stimulation and demand and the continuous input that keeps the scanning protocols running at full speed. Fuel runs low and monitoring slows. Input dries up and processing idles. Threat is absent and vigilance dims, and in the dimming, the everything else emerges, gentle and surprising and entirely ordinary, the vast and boring miracle of a body at rest in a dark room with nothing to do and nowhere to be. This is what happens when nothing happens. Nothing is replaced by everything. Vigilance gives way to presence. Monitoring gives way to awareness, plain awareness, without an object, awareness that does not need to be aware of anything in particular because it is aware of everything already: breath and darkness, the weight of the body, temperature of the air, the slow and reliable beating of a heart that has been beating since before you were born, a heart that will continue beating through this night and through the morning and through all the days and nights that follow, not because you are monitoring it, but because it knows how to beat, has always known, does not need supervision or management or the anxious attention of a mind that thinks the world will avouch its intervention. There is a deep and particular pleasure in this kind of nothing, the kind that the always busy mind cannot access, because accessing it requires the cessation of the very activity that the mind uses to access things. It is a pleasure that cannot be pursued, only stumbled upon, the way a person searching for their glasses cannot find them, because the searching is the obstruction. You stop looking for rest, and rest appears, not as an achievement but as the natural condition that was already present underneath the looking. You stop trying to relax, and relaxation is simply there, not because you summoned it, but because it was never absent, only obscured by the effort of trying to summon it. This paradox is one that the monitoring mind finds deeply frustrating, because the monitoring mind exists to do things, accomplish objectives, convert effort into results. Telling it that the result it seeks can only be achieved by the absence of seeking is like telling a fisherman that the only way to catch a fish is to put down the rod. It contradicts everything the mind knows about how the world works. It violates the fundamental equation on which the monitoring mind's entire existence is based, which is that effort produces outcomes and more effort produces better outcomes, and the absence of effort produces nothing at all. But here, in this room, in this darkness, the equation is inverted. Effort produces tension. More effort produces more tension. The absence of effort produces the one thing that all the effort was trying to achieve, which is rest, deep, genuine, unforced rest, not the shallow imitation of rest that the mind produces when it decides to perform relaxation, tensing one muscle group at a time and releasing it according to protocol, not the strategic rest of the power nap, or the recovery day, or the carefully scheduled downtime that is really just another form of optimization. This is rest that lacks strategy or schedule or any defined objective. It is rest that exists because nothing is preventing it from existing, the way a river exists because nothing is preventing the water from flowing downhill. Heart beats, lungs fill, body rests, nothing happens, and everything continues. Something is different now. You may not be able to identify what has changed, because the change is not in any single part of the body or any single thought in the mind. It is in the quality of the experience itself, the overall flavor of this moment compared to the moment when you first lay down. The flavor has shifted, subtly, from the sharp, metallic taste of alertness to something rounder, something warmer, something that has more in common with honey than with iron. The shift did not happen all at once. It happened in increments so small that no single increment was noticeable, the way the color of the sky changes during sunset, each second indistinguishable from the one before it but the cumulative effect unmistakable. The softening has begun. This is not the dramatic release that stories and films depict, the moment when the character finally breaks down and lets it all go in a cathartic flood of tears and trembling. That kind of release makes for good cinema, but it is not how the body typically processes its stored tension. The body is more conservative than that, more cautious, more incremental in its approach to letting go. It releases the way a glacier releases meltwater, not all at once, but in a slow, continuous trickle that can go on for a very long time, each drop insignificant on its own, but the cumulative volume substantial. What softens first are usually the extremities, hands, which have been holding some residual tension from the day's activities, gripping pens and steering wheels and phone screens, and the armrests of chairs begin to loosen. The fingers uncurl by a degree that would be invisible to an observer, but that is perceptible to you, if you are paying attention, as warmth in the palms, heaviness in the joints, a sense of the hands becoming more like hands and less like tools. Feet undergo a similar process, toes releasing their mild contracture, arches softening, the ankles settling into a neutral position that requires no muscular effort to maintain. From the extremities, the softening moves inward, following the body's own logic, which is a logic of concentric circles, releasing first what is farthest from the center and working gradually toward the core. Forearms soften, calves follow, muscles along the outer edges of the thighs, which have been maintaining a low-level contraction related to the hip flexors' chronic engagement, begin to let go of some of that contraction related to the hip flexors' chronic engagement, begin to let go of some of that contraction, releasing the thighs into a slightly wider, whitey. Each release is accompanied by a barely perceptible increase in the sensation of weight, as though the softening were allowing gravity to reach parts of the body that the tension had been holding above gravity's influence. The softening is not even. It does not proceed at a uniform rate through all tissues simultaneously. Some muscles release quickly, eager to let go of a tension they were holding reluctantly, the way a person drops a hot plate the moment they have somewhere safe to put it. Other muscles release slowly, cautiously, maintaining a portion of their tension even as the surrounding tissues let go, the way a soldier on the front line might lower his weapon but keep his finger near the trigger, not quite ready to trust the ceasefire entirely. This unevenness is normal. It reflects the body's individual history of tension and release, the particular pattern of holding that was shaped by particular experiences, particular postures, by the particular ways you have met the world. Your shoulders are a place where the unevenness is often most apparent. One may be releasing faster than the other. One may be dropping toward the mattress while the other maintains its elevated position, held there by a network of muscles that have been contracted for so long that they have shortened, and shortened muscles do not release instantly when the signal to release arrives. They release gradually, fiber by fiber, over minutes or hours, as the biochemistry of the muscle tissue slowly shifts from the chemistry of contraction to the chemistry of relaxation. This shift requires time and warmth, both of which are available in abundance tonight. The jaw, too, is in the process of softening, though the jaw's relationship to tension is more complex than the shoulders, because the jaw is connected not only to the musculoskeletal system, but to the emotional system, holding not just physical tension but the residue of everything that was not said today, words that were bitten back, reactions that were suppressed, moments when the teeth came together in a silent expression of frustration or determination, or the effort of keeping something inside that wanted to come out. The jaw softens when the emotional holding softens, and the emotional holding softens when the body feels safe enough to stop suppressing, which happens not through deliberate emotional processing but through the simple, gradual accumulation of safety that these dark hours provide. You may feel the jaw releasing as a slight dropping of the lower mandible, a separation of the teeth that creates a small warm space between the upper and lower molars. This space is precious. It is the physical equivalent of a pause in conversation, breath between words, an interruption in the continuous pressure that the jaw has been maintaining all day. Allow that space to exist. Allow the teeth to be apart, It can hang in its sling of muscle like a hammock that has been emptied of its occupant, still shaped by the weight that was in it, but no longer carrying that weight, open and available and at rest. The belly is perhaps the last to soften, because the belly is the body's most protected territory, the soft center where the vital organs are housed without the bony armor that protects the heart and the lungs. The belly responds to threat by hardening, by pulling the abdominal muscles tight against the surface like a shield, and this hardening can persist long after the threat has passed, maintained by the same deep brain circuits that maintain the overall state of vigilance. A soft belly is a vulnerable belly, and vulnerability is exactly what the guardian mind has been working to prevent. But the belly is softening. You may be able to feel it, a slight relaxation in the muscles of the lower abdomen, a slight expansion of the breath into territory that has been off limits during the tight, shallow breathing of the vigilant hours. The breath is finding its way down, past the diaphragm, into the bowl of the pelvis, filling spaces that have been compressed and restricted and held tight since the morning, or since long before the morning. Each breath that reaches the belly is a small act of trust, a demonstration to the nervous system that the center is safe, that the vital territory does not need to be defended right now, that the shield can be lowered without catastrophic consequences. The softening is a process, not an event. It will continue throughout the night, long after these words have ended, long after the voice has stopped speaking and the room has returned to its original silence. The body will continue its work of releasing and softening and adjusting, using the chemistry of sleep to accomplish what the chemistry of wakefulness could not, metabolizing the tension that the waking mind kept refreshing, dismantling the bracing that the waking body kept rebuilding. Sleep is the body's workshop, and in the workshop, the policies of the waking mind do not apply. Guardian is off duty. Monitoring system is in low power mode. Muscles are free to return to their natural length without being immediately recruited back into the posture of readiness. The softening that has begun will deepen. That is all you need to know. It has a trajectory and pace of its own, a destination, and none of these things require your management or your understanding. The body knows how to soften. It was designed to soften. It has been waiting for the conditions that permit softening, and the conditions are here, and the body is responding in its own time, in its own way, with the quiet efficiency of an organism that knows exactly what to do when it is finally allowed to do it. Let the softening continue. Let the body do its work. You are not the manager of this process. You are its beneficiary. There is a stretch of the night that belongs to no one. It does not belong to the day that preceded it, which has ended and whose claims on your attention have expired. It does not belong to the morning that will follow, whose demands are still theoretical, potential energies that have not yet converted to the kinetic. Nor does it belong to the people who occupy your waking hours, who are, at this moment, either asleep themselves or living their own nights in other rooms, other houses, other cities, at distances that the monitoring mind cannot bridge and should not try to. These hours, the ones you are moving through right now, dark and quiet as they are that sit between the last conscious thought of the evening and the first conscious thought of the morning, these hours are unclaimed territory. This is unusual. In the daylight hours, every minute belongs to someone or something. Morning belongs to the routine. Midday belongs to the work. Afternoon belongs to the obligations, and evening belongs to the people, to the relationships that require presence and attention, and the emotional labor of being a human in the company of other humans. Even the time that is nominally free, an hour before dinner, a half hour after the children are in bed, some brief window between finishing the work and starting the next thing, even these supposedly free times are haunted by the awareness that they are borrowed, that they exist only as gaps between obligations and will be reclaimed the moment the next obligation arrives. But these hours, deep night hours that start after the last task is done, after the last thought has been thought, after the body has finally been placed in the position that signals the end of the day. These hours are genuinely, structurally free. No calendar app is tracking them. No project or person or goal has claimed them. Not productive time, not leisure time, not self-care time or quality time. Not leisure time, not self-care time or quality time. Just time, raw and unallocated, the one remaining stretch in the 24-hour cycle that has not been colonized by the relentless human drive to make every moment count. Let them not count. These hours can be unproductive, unoptimized, unmeasured. They can be the hours that the efficiency experts and the life hack gurus and the self-improvement industry cannot reach, the hours that resist all attempts to be converted into something useful, because their usefulness lies precisely in their uselessness, in the fact that they serve no purpose except to exist and pass and carry the body from one day to the next through the ancient and unglamorous vehicle of sleep. You are in these hours now. The day is behind you and it is finished, truly finished, not paused or put on hold but completed, its story written, its events recorded in the memory of a body that will process them overnight without your conscious participation. Whatever happened today happened. It cannot be changed, revised, improved, or undone from this horizontal position in this dark room. Emails you did not send will not send themselves before morning. Conversations you did not have will not resolve themselves while you sleep. Problems you did not solve will remain unsolved until morning provides light, energy, and cognitive capacity to address them, and even then, they may remain unsolved, because some problems are like that, persistent and patient, waiting for conditions that have not yet arrived. This acceptance, the acceptance that the day is done and its incompletions are permanent, at least until morning, is one of the quietest and most radical forms of letting go available to a human mind. The monitoring mind does not want to accept this. It wants to keep the day open, maintain a live connection to the day's unfinished business, carry the open loops into the night like luggage that might be needed during the journey. But the luggage is not needed. The journey through the night requires nothing except the body's presence and the body's willingness to be carried, and the body needs no luggage for this. It needs no to-do list, no action plan, nothing resembling a contingency strategy. It needs only warmth, stillness, and breath, and to be allowed to drift in the direction it is already drifting, which is towards sleep. The hours that belong to no one are the hours that belong to you. Not to the you that manages a life and meets its obligations and maintains its relationships and presents a competent face to the world, but to something underneath all of that, the self that was here before the responsibilities arrived and that will be here after they are resolved, a self that is not defined by what it does, but by the simple, persistent, irreducible fact that it exists. This you does not need to be productive. It does not need to be improving. It does not need to be healing or processing or growing or becoming a better version of itself. It needs only to be, which is the one thing that the busy, monitoring, always available mind makes almost impossible during the daylight hours, but which the night, in its infinite patience, makes not only possible but inevitable. You are being right now, not doing, simply being. The distinction matters because doing is what the always-on mind understands, and being is what happens when the doing stops. It is not a lesser form of doing, not the absence of productivity. It is the ground from which all productivity arises, the silence from which all sound comes. Without being, doing has no foundation. Without the rest that comes from simply existing, the activity of the waking hours becomes increasingly frantic, increasingly hollow, increasingly disconnected from the center of gravity that gives human action its weight and its meaning. These hours reconnect you to that center, not through effort, not through intention, not through any technique or practice that the waking mind can claim credit for. Reconnection happens automatically, the way a compass needle returns to north when the magnetic interference is removed. Monitoring and scanning and constant vigilant processing of threat and obligation and social demand, all of this is magnetic interference, powerful enough during the day to pull the needle away from its natural orientation and hold it there for hours on end. But in the night, interference fades, fields diminish, and the needle, relieved of the forces that were pulling it sideways, slowly, gently, inevitably returns to its original alignment. Helping the needle is not necessary. Guiding it or pushing it or willing it toward north is not necessary. All that is needed is the removal of the interference, which is already being removed by the simple mechanics of the night. Darkness shutting down visual processing that consumes so much of the brain's bandwidth, quiet reducing the auditory load, stillness releasing the proprioceptive and vestibular systems from the constant work of maintaining balance and orientation in a three-dimensional world. Each system that powers down removes a portion of the interference, and each reduction brings the needle a fraction of a degree closer to its natural resting position, which is the position of deep, unguarded, unmonitored rest. The hours that belong to no one are carrying you there. Let them carry you. They know the way. They have been making this journey for as long as there have been nights, which is as long as there has been an Earth turning its face away from the sun, which is approximately 4.5 billion years, give or take a few hundred million. The night has been doing this for a very long time. It is quite good at it. You are in capable hands, or rather, you are in capable darkness, which has no hands but has something better, which is a complete and unconditional indifference to everything that the waking mind considers important, combined with an absolute commitment to providing the conditions in which the body can do its deepest and most essential work. Rest now, not because you should, not because it is healthy or responsible or productive. Rest because these hours are yours, and they are asking nothing of you, and the asking of nothing is itself a kind of gift that the day never offers and the morning never remembers. Deep in the body, beneath the level of conscious awareness, something is unwinding. It has been unwinding since you lay down, proceeding at its own pace through its own sequence of operations, governed by biochemical gradients and neural oscillations that have nothing to do with willpower or intention or the conscious decision to relax. The unwinding is automatic. It is what the body does when the conditions permit it, the same way that a spring returns to its resting length when the force that compressed it is removed. Not because the spring decides to expand, but because expansion is what a compressed spring does when it is no longer being held. The force that compressed you was the day, not a single event within the day, but the day itself, accumulated pressure of consciousness, weight of being alive and aware in a world that demands constant engagement. Sensations processed, decisions made, emotions felt, and social interactions navigated, each one of these added a small amount of compression to the spring, and by the time the day ended, the spring, which is you, which is your body, was carrying a compressive load that was substantial without being dramatic, the kind of load that does not cause failure but that changes the material properties of the thing carrying it, making it denser, less flexible, less responsive to small perturbations. The night removes the load, not all at once, because the load was not applied all at once, but in the reverse order of application, the most recent compressions releasing first, followed by the ones that were applied earlier in the day, followed, if the night is long enough and the sleep is deep enough, by compressions that predate this particular day entirely, residual loads of previous days and previous weeks that were never fully discharged because days were too compressed and nights too short, and the body never quite reached the depth of rest required to release them. You are approaching that depth now. The surface layers of tension have already begun to release, muscles of face and hands and feet settling toward their resting lengths, breath deepening in its own time, the heart rate finding a slower, more economical rhythm that is appropriate for a body at rest. These surface releases are the easy ones, tensions that were applied most recently and have the weakest grip, letting go the way sand lets go of footprints when the tide comes in, smoothly and without resistance. Beneath the surface layers, deeper tensions are beginning to stir. These are compressions that have been held for much longer, chronic patterns that were not produced by today's events, but by many days' accumulation, the posture of readiness that the body has been maintaining for weeks or months, the protective bracing that became so constant that it stopped registering as normal. These deeper tensions do not release as readily as the surface ones. They have had longer to establish themselves, longer to become integrated into the body's structural patterns, longer to be accepted by the nervous system as part of the baseline. Releasing them requires more time, more safety, more consecutive hours of reduced arousal than a single night typically provides. But the process is beginning even if it cannot be completed tonight. The deeper tensions are being reached by the same biochemical signals that release the surface ones, the same cascades of inhibitory neurotransmitters and muscle-relaxing hormones that the brain releases during the transition from wakefulness to sleep. These signals are like warm water poured over ice, not capable of melting the entire structure in one pass, but capable of softening the surface, rounding the sharp edges, reducing the overall mass by a small but meaningful amount. Tomorrow night, if the conditions are similar, the process will continue where it left off, working a little deeper into the layers of stored tension, releasing a little more of the chronic compression. Over time, night after night, the cumulative effect of these incremental releases can be substantial, not dramatic, not transformative in the way that a single night of perfect sleep is sometimes promised to be, but real, measurable, perceptible as increased flexibility in the body, deeper breath, lower baseline arousal that has been running too high for too long. The unwinding is happening now. You are part of it, in the sense that you are the thing being unwound, but you are not directing it, because the directing is being done by systems that are older than your conscious mind and far more experienced at this particular kind of work. The body has been unwinding at night for as long as there have been bodies, which is a very long time, much longer than there have been worries, much longer than there have been worries, much longer than there have been emails and deadlines and the particular flavor of modern anxiety that keeps the spring compressed past its design specifications. The body's unwinding protocols were refined over evolutionary timescales, tested against every conceivable variety of daytime compression, from the physical exhaustion of the hunter to the social stress of the primate to the existential anxiety of the human, and they work. They work imperfectly, incompletely, gradually, but they work, and they are working now inside you, beneath the level of your awareness, with the quiet competence of a process that has been running successfully for hundreds of millions of years. Trust the process. Not with the forced trust of someone who has been told to trust and is trying very hard to comply, but with the organic trust of a body that is already doing what it is being asked to trust, a body that is already unwinding, already releasing, already descending toward the deeper registers of rest where the chronic tensions live and where, given enough time and enough safety, even the most stubborn of them can begin to yield. There is a particular wisdom in this process that the conscious mind cannot replicate, no matter how many books about stress management it has read or how many relaxation techniques it has attempted. The wisdom belongs to the body itself, to the tissues that know their own history of compression and their own pathway back to ease. A muscle that has been contracted for months knows exactly how to release, fiber by fiber, in a sequence that respects the structural relationships between itself and its neighbors, maintaining stability while restoring flexibility. A balance that no conscious strategy could achieve because the calculations required are too complex and too numerous for the thinking mind to perform. The body does not need to calculate. It simply responds to the changing chemistry, the way a plant responds to changing light, bending toward what nourishes it with an intelligence that requires no thought. You can feel this intelligence at work if you pay attention, though paying attention is not required and may, in fact, interfere slightly with the process, the way watching a pot makes the water seem to take longer to boil. The intelligence is there in the way the body makes small adjustments throughout the night, shifting position by fractions of an inch, redistributing weight, rotating a joint, all without waking, all without waking, all without conscious direction, all in the service of an optimization that the waking mind could never manage, the continuous fine-tuning of a system that is doing its best to return to a baseline it has not visited in too long. Something is expanding in you now. Compression is releasing, force has been removed, and the material is returning, slowly, slowly, to the shape it had before the force was applied. This shape is not a destination. It is a direction and a tendency that the body follows whenever the conditions allow it, bending always toward ease, bending always toward ease, bending always toward rest. You are moving in that direction now. Let the movement continue. Let the unwinding proceed. The body knows where it is going. It has been going there every night since the beginning of nights, and it does not need directions or encouragement or supervision. It needs only what it already has, which is darkness, quiet, warmth, and the absence of anything that needs to be done, and it needs only what it is already doing, which is the ancient, reliable, unsupervised work of returning itself to a state of rest so deep that the waking mind has no name for it, knows nothing about it, and does not need to. The unwinding continues. Let it continue. The voice has been with you for a while now. It has moved through the room like a current through still water, touching the surfaces of your attention without disturbing them, saying its words and letting the words settle wherever they happen to settle, in the muscles or the mind or the spaces between thoughts, wherever there was room. The voice did not come with an agenda. It did not arrive carrying a set of outcomes that needed to be achieved or a timeline that needed to be met. It came because the night is long and the quiet is deep, and sometimes, for the person who has been carrying the weight of their own watchfulness for longer than they can remember, the sound of a voice that asks for nothing is enough to tip the balance, to shift the system from the state of chronic readiness to the state of something else. Something that does not have a name, because naming things is a daytime activity, and this is not daytime activity, and this is not daytime. The night is here. It has been here since before you lay down, of course, spreading across neighborhood and city, across fields and highways with the patient indifference of a force that does not care about your concerns or your schedule or your to-do list. The night is not impressed by the things that impress you. It is not moved by the urgencies that move you. It is simply dark, and in its darkness, it offers something that the bright hours cannot, which is the absolute, non-negotiable cessation of visual demand, the closing of the one sensory channel that consumes more of your brain's resources than all the others combined. With that channel dimmed, the brain's budget is suddenly and dramatically rebalanced, and the surplus, the vast surplus of neural energy that was being spent on processing light and color and shape and movement and the constant visual monitoring of the environment, all of that surplus is now available for the work that happens in the dark: repair, integration, rest. You are resting. Perhaps you have been resting for some time without realizing it, because rest, unlike sleep, does not have a clearly defined onset, a moment when the switch is flipped and the state changes from one thing to another. Rest arrives gradually, in layers, each one slightly deeper than the one before, each one carrying you a little further from the surface of waking awareness and a little closer to the depths, where the body does its most essential work. You do not need to know which layer you are on. You do not need to track your descent or assess your progress or evaluate whether the rest is deep enough or good enough or the right kind. The rest is the right kind. Whatever kind it is, whatever depth you have reached, it is the right kind, because it is the kind your body is producing in response to the actual conditions of this actual moment, and the body's response to its conditions is, by definition, appropriate. The watching has quieted. You may notice this or you may not notice it, because the quieting of the watching is, paradoxically, most effective when it goes unnoticed, when the monitoring mind subsides so gradually and so completely that its absence is not registered as an event, but simply as a change in the weather, a clearing of clouds that happened while you were looking the other way. Guardian is resting. Scanner is in low-power mode, that thread of awareness that connects you to the external world, to people and problems and the persistent background emergency that constitutes so much of your waking experience. That thread has gone slack, not cut but slack, carrying no tension, transmitting no urgency, simply existing in its relaxed state, ready to be picked up again in the morning, but for now, for these hours, carrying nothing. Let the breath carry you now, not the conscious breath, the one you can feel in your nostrils and chest and belly, but the deeper breath, the one that breathes you, an autonomic rhythm that continues without your participation and that, during sleep, becomes the body's primary clock, the metronome against which all other rhythms are calibrated. This breath is slowing. It has been slowing since the unwinding began, each cycle a fraction of a second longer than the last, each inhale a fraction of a milliliter deeper, each exhale a fraction of a degree more complete. The slowing is imperceptible from one breath to the next, but cumulative over the span of these hours, and by morning, the breath will have reached a depth and a slowness that the waking body rarely achieves, a rhythm that belongs to the deepest stages of sleep, where consciousness is thin and the body's maintenance crews are fully operational, repairing what the day damaged, consolidating what the day learned, clearing what the day accumulated. You are approaching that depth. You may already have crossed the threshold once or twice, dipping below the surface of wakefulness and returning, the way a swimmer dips below the surface of a warm lake, testing the temperature, getting accustomed to the change in pressure, preparing for the moment when the dipping becomes a dive and the surface is left behind entirely. The dipping is part of the process. It is the body's way of transitioning gradually from one state to another, building a bridge between wakefulness and sleep that can be crossed at the body's own pace, without the jolt of a sudden descent. The bridge is there. You are on it. Each breath carries you a step further. Each moment of quiet adds a plank to the structure, extending it deeper into the territory of sleep. The bridge does not require your attention. It does not require your faith. It requires only your continued presence, which is not something you can withhold, because presence is not an activity but a condition, the condition of being alive in a body that is lying in a dark room, breathing, warm, heavy with the good heaviness of a day that has been fully lived and fully released. The morning will come, it always comes, and when it does, there will be light, and with the light there will be the usual cascade of demands and responsibilities and small urgencies that the daylight mind finds so compelling. The monitoring system will power up again because that is what it does, and the guardian will resume its post, and the guardian will resume its post, and the scanning will begin, and you will be, once again, the person who is always on. That is tomorrow's reality, and it does not need your attention tonight. These hours belong to a version of you that precedes all that activity, one that exists before the first alarm and after the last thought, one that is not doing anything and does not need to be doing anything and is, in the absence of doing, exactly and entirely itself. There is nothing left to say that the silence is not already saying better. The silence knows your name. It knows the shape of your tiredness. It knows the weight of the watching you have done and the depth of the rest you deserve. It has been waiting for you all day, patient and unhurried, and now that you are here, it is going to do what it does best, which is nothing at all, for as long as you need it, which is as long as the night will last, which is long enough. Rest now, not because you should, not because a voice told you to. Rest because the body is ready, because the mind is quiet, because night is here, and the part of you that never gets to rest is finally at rest. Dark is holding you. Quiet is holding you. Hours that belong to no one are holding you in their soft and spacious hands, and there is nothing to watch, nothing to monitor, nothing to track, nothing to hold. Let go. The night has you. Let go.